Yeah, so I can try and be as quick as possible. It is quite a story. There's lots of twists and turns in the middle of it that I won't get into tonight. But basically, I had a company that took or would take products, basically anything kind of hot, and I got involved in the internet very early. On dial-up, I can still remember plugging it in and hearing the thing fire up, and I got into selling products online, and that kind of built up. I had a pretty good affiliate network, but people would bring me products all the time, and these products, they would want me to basically build my own brand. They were white label products. If you're familiar with that, you can bring anything you want, like a creatine, and have your own label on it, create your own brand, sell as much as you can. So people would bring me products. I had a manufacturer in Europe. He calls me one day and he says, listen, I made a deal with a pharmaceutical company, and we've got these off-brand or these products that have never been brought to the market. There was a list of 20 different products on it. It was all in broken English because the company was in Italy, and one of them said lactic acid blocker. And I'm like, that's impossible. Send me some of this stuff. I got a couple other things on the list, and when it showed up, it was in these little glass vials. I think I still have them, straight from the lab, had lab stickers on it. And I'm like, okay, it said it was topically applied. So it just so happened, it took me a while to get them, but it was kind of just leading into the fall, end of summer. So there were some summer skates. I've been playing hockey since I was little. You would know it because I still skate on my ankles. But anyways, been playing a long time. So I grabbed this stuff. I go in the dressing room. I start putting it on. And hockey's a different sport. Guys like, what are you doing over there? I'm putting on this stuff out of these glass vials, and they're like, what is that? And I said, I'm just trying something out. Anyways, when I got out there and went, right away, like one or two shifts in, I knew that there was something going on in my body. I couldn't put a finger on exactly what was happening, but I could just, take a longer shift. I had more energy at the end of the shift. I just knew that something felt better. And then at the end, and again, first game of the season, lots of really good hockey players. They're still home from the summer. So lots of pro players, lots of junior players, they're out there for skate. So it was good hockey. When the Zamboni, which is the ice cleaner for those who don't play hockey, was starting to come on the ice, I wanted to test my legs. So I was able to do almost 2 full laps before I felt the heaviness and burning in my legs. I was like, weird. Like I should be gassed right now. I shouldn't be able to do what I just did. So that was it. I was like, okay, there's something weird about this stuff, but great. So a lot of my hockey buddies, we play pickleball. I've been way ahead of the curve. I'm going back probably, I think of 2011. I put a cord in, so I've been playing a long time before this craze. And all the hockey guys would come over and play pickleball, so it was the next day. And then a bunch of the young guys who were much younger than me, they were just complaining how sore they were from playing hockey the day before. Like, man, my legs are gassed, and we've been doing this all our lives. It's the same routine every summer. Is you go for your first skate and you know it. And I was like, wow, my legs feel really good. They were going up the steps and they were complaining. And I was like, my legs, I'm not complaining. Like they just felt fresh. So I said, it must have been that stuff that I put on. So that Monday, I called my manufacturer who gave me the product overseas, and I said, "Have you guys given this to anybody?" And he said, "No, you're the very first person to get it." I said, "Do not give it to another soul." I said, I definitely want to get the rights to North America for this." And he said, "Yep, no problem." So we started working on that, and he saw, going through the process of trademarking and obviously the contracts getting exclusive for North America on the product. He's like, "You're serious about this one?" I said, "Absolutely." Like I always told myself if I found that product, I would, push all in and go for it. And that's what at the time I thought I had, even though it was a licensing deal. As we worked along, I had to do, I did a couple different brands. So this is one of the first ones. No, I don't even think anybody's seen that one before, but that was one of the first brands we tried. Lactigard, and we got almost all the trademarks on it, then got refused in I think Canada and the US, so had to start all over again. So anyways, during this process, my friend in the UK, who's I was doing a lot of business with, and we had a great relationship. He says, "You're really serious?" And I'm saying, "Absolutely." He says, "Well, why don't we team up? We'll build the brand together. I have the exclusive rights to the world to do licensing agreements, and then we'll do it together." I said, "Perfect." So as we're moving along the trademarks and everything else, with that relationship, I ended up getting in contact with the pharmaceutical company in Italy. And even though there was only one person that could speak English, we started communicating. I finally, got to the point of asking him, hey, this is going to be a long build before you really start to see some revenues from heavy sales. Is there any chance you want to sell the IP, intellectual property, on the product? And at that point, they said, yeah, we would be interested in something like that. They kind of wanted the money up front. So, um, got a team from here, got my lawyers from here. I already had an IP attorney over in Europe that was working on the trademark and everything else. And we ended up going to Zurich, Switzerland, and met over 3 days in a conference room. At the time, I couldn't understand why the heck they would ever sell this formulation. And that was a kind of the whole way along, I'm like, this is so weird. Like, why would they give up this formulation? Until I met the owner of the company. And when I met him in person, it was just like an aha moment. It was unbelievable. And I don't want to talk bad about them because, but this man was probably the most arrogant person I've ever met. He wouldn't even look at me in the eyes. When the first morning that we were going to meet, they sat and like they had their team over there, and we had our team here, and it was like the big bad North Americans and against the Italians, and they had their team. And we got in that conference room, and this guy was in a pinstripe suit, slick back hair. He looked, like I say, I always say he looked like Roberto Luongo. If you know that goaltender where he's got the Italian hair slicked back and his horn rim glasses and a Rolex the size of your fist on his wrist. And he just, smelled like $1 million. And he wouldn't look. He was just this angry Italian guy. And I was like, okay, I get it. So during the process, I found out that it was a young female scientist that was new to the company that had actually formulated this product. And they didn't, I mean, this is what I believe. I believe that he didn't put any merit into her work. She was wet behind the ears. She had just new to the company, and she'd created this formula, and they didn't put any value into it. So, they were looking for a quick, score of cash, and that's ultimately what came out of the deal. Is we ended up, negotiating for the product. And for the formulation, I should say. And then at that point, we had a decision to make, whether we went, just a trademark like what we were doing at the time with Lactigo, or do we, pursue the patent route? And the advice was, listen, if you're going to do just a trademark, great, you can build the brand heavy and you can have a successful run, but somebody will be able to reverse engineer the formulation. But at the time, it was going to be very, very costly to start the patent. It's not like doing a widget that you can, just make up. It's not like patenting a widget. When you're doing a formulation going into the, pharmaceutical space, it's a big deal. So we needed a lot of science and a lot of traction. So again, thinking back, you only get one chance, and things at the time were pretty good. So as far as the other business goes, and so we pushed all in and said we're going to go patent. The patent attorney said, listen, it's probably going to take you 7 to 10 years just before you get your first approval. Once you get your first approval, then the rest will start coming in. And he was bang on. I think the first patent was about 7 years it took to get our very first patent. And we got the very first patent in the US, which was the most important patent. And we still wanted to keep it under the radar because we didn't want anybody to know what we were doing. At the time when I first got my hands on it, I thought, because of my era, that it was going to be like a creatine, just a sports product, athletes, that was going to be it. It was going to be like a sports product. And it wasn't until I actually met Chad Macias and then Tim Sharp through Chad that we figured out, like, holy smokes, guys, this is a lot more than a sports product. It's not only going to help athletes, but it can help the everyday person. And I think it wasn't until that point that I started, giving it to my family to use in everyday health, and not just for athletes after these guys described. And that was a very interesting meeting when I met Chad. And I know that we're gonna kind of move over to Chad here in a minute, and he can kind of tell the story. But and we remember it a little bit differently because I think when he reached out to me because it was a UFC fighter that was using it in the gym and telling him that it buffered lactic acid, he was like, "There's no way." So he called me up and he basically was, there's no way that this product is clean if it's really doing what you say it's doing. And I said, listen, I wasn't a scientist. I just said, listen, let me just send you the product. And I shipped him the product, and we'll get Chad on here to kind of tell the story of what it did for him when he first tried it. And obviously his scientific mind is and I'm sure Tim was his first phone call saying, "What the heck does this guy have his hands on?" And then they got involved, and basically it was Chad and then Tim who said, "Listen, you guys, you got to slow down. You guys can't go to market like you are right now. We had some science, but we didn't. We needed more science." And they said, "If you go out into the market without science, you're going to get butchered." So the fact of the matter was we were patent pending because we were in the patent process. We didn't have all of the science. So at that point, we kind of had to kind of glide underneath the radar a little bit to make sure that we could get our patents in place. And that gave the guys time to design some studies and start knocking out the science. And what we've figured out is pretty significant. So the fact that maybe I'll give my quick spiel on this before I turn it over to Chad. But the best way I always describe Lactigo is if you think about a horse, a migratory bird, or a dog. A horse can run a long race. A migratory bird can fly over the ocean for 5 days at 90% without ever taking a break. And that's because they have high levels of carnosine in their skeletal muscle. So the more carnosine you have within your skeletal muscle, the further and faster you can go without because you're recovering all the time. But in humans and all animals, it's genetically determined. So everybody produces different amounts of carnosine, and that's why you'll get a guy who can run a 110-mile race, or Usain Bolt can run like he does, because his body creates a high percentage of carnosine. The interesting thing about our product, the formulation is 100% cosmetic, and these molecules have never been topically applied like this in this manner and to have any effect. So that's the significance of the product. And I'll let Chad and Tim maybe speak on the science and what it actually does, because it's so much more than athletics, what it does. But it's a pretty incredible product that the world just doesn't know about yet. So maybe I can take it away from there. I'm sure you guys have shared that it's mandatory in the NHL this year that every home team has to supply the visiting team in every NHL dressing room, and we're already selling into.
Can you repeat? We haven't said anything to anybody on this call, so they're
Oh,
here.
okay. Well, I can tell you that.
Pause there. Slow down. Say some things again. You might want to say that again.
Well, yeah. So the product itself kind of spread through word of mouth. I ended up getting it to another buddy that I played hockey with, who was a pro hockey player, and he sent it to some other guys playing pro, and they said, he's like, "You just got to try this stuff." So send him the sachets. He tried it. He gave it to another friend. Next thing you know, it got to Eric Fair, who's not on the call today. He started using it on the ice, and he the first time he used it, he never stopped using it. It just made such a difference to him on the ice. So it was only spreading word of mouth. But the most difficult thing with pro hockey players, even Eric, when you're a hockey player, there's 100 guys waiting to take your job. So when you have that advantage on the ice, you don't really want to share it. I mean, when it finally got to the high end guys, the top three in the league, and they started telling their team to use it, that's when it really started picking up steam. And then they all started learning about it and then trade deadlines were the best for us. In those early days when we weren't in all the teams, as soon as a trade deadline, we were like, yes, he just got moved, because he'd go to we knew what teams were using it. Then they would spread to other teams. And then last year they ended up doing a vote. So all of the trainers got together and they voted, and they said, who in the room is using Lactigo? And all 32 trainers put their hand up, and they're like, okay, obviously, we're carrying it from rink to rink when we're traveling. Let's make it mandatory that the home team supplies the visiting team, so we don't have to carry this stuff on the road, because all the guys, or the majority of the guys want to use it. So now it's actually mandatory for the home team to supply the visiting team with Lactigo. I can go on to, we've got, Team Canada Rugby, Team Canada Hockey, Team USA. I mean, the list goes on and on. what we find is that the advantage these guys, and this is what the head trainer for Rugby Canada told me, the guys will tape the bottles when they go on the field because they don't want the other team seeing what they're applying to themselves. So it's pretty cool. And then of course we have an incredible study that the New Zealand All Blacks, who are big users of the sevens team, is a big user of Lactigo. They ended up doing their study completely independently of us. They did a study. They saw such dramatic results from the All Black rugby players that they called the university, did their own study, and they found that every single player in a triple blinded study saw between an 8 and a 12% increase in performance after a single application. So let that sink in. The average pro athlete, if they're lucky to get 1 to 2% a year. So to get 8 to 12% from a single application within 40 minutes of putting it on is unbelievable. So, and I don't want to steal the thunder from the science guys because they're really going to give me a beating on the side if I take away all their thunder. And I really want Chad and Tim to get on here, but that's the story of Lactigo. It's a pretty amazing product. I cannot lay claim to being the person that actually formulated it, but I guess you can say I was the first person to try it in North America and recognize what it is. And here we are so many years later, and we're finally at a point now. We've nearly got 50 patents. Well, patents in nearly 50 countries, and we still have 4 or 5 more countries that are still pending. They're all in good shape. They're going to happen, but that's how long that process takes. So maybe I should pass it over to
Well, I
Chad, or do
love
you want to do the intro?
Sure, no problem. I'm excited too, as always, being here with this group of people. Um, like kind of Kevin mentioned, the year that I came in contact with him was the end of 2014. Heading into 2015 is when we kind of started those discussions. Briefly to kind of give you guys where I was at and what we were doing at the time that this happened. I was wearing basically kind of 3 hats. I was running the Institute for Human Kinetics, where I worked with Dr. Tim Sharp. And we had spent about 20 years kind of optimizing cellular and molecular human performance. We worked with Racers Track Club as well as Brittany Reese, Dalia Muhammad, Kevin Sorrell, Carlin Isles, Usain Bolt, Asafa Powell. So basically anybody that won a gold medal in track and field over a 20-year span, they were our athletes. We were responsible for the human performance of those athletes and how they prepared both in Olympic year, preparing for competition, as well as the 3.5 years in between each Olympic Games. And so we took those athletes through all 4 of those Olympic Games with pretty much every single person I mentioned. So we had 20 years with each of them, 4 Olympic Games in total, where each of them were multi gold medal or multi-medal winners. None of our athletes left the Olympic Games without a gold or a silver medal, and I don't think any of them ever won bronze, maybe one. So they were pretty successful, and that was only probably 25% of the athletes that we worked with. At the time, I was also working with human performance and position coaching in the National Football League, where I worked also advising teams like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Philadelphia Eagles, and I spent 12 years with the now Los Angeles Chargers, where I'm still pretty heavily involved. And then as mentioned, I was director of performance and combatives for Navy Special Warfare, working with the Navy SEALs through Advanced Training Command, ATC, where we prepared them for combat deployment through various methods of human performance as well as combat training. And I was involved in both of those, both in the hand-to-hand combat as well as the human performance. I myself was a 3-sport former athlete, 2-sport Team USA athlete in the sports of hockey, as well as boxing. And then I also played football and had a scholarship at Florida State. So I had a lot of backgrounds that intersected in the areas where these athletes needed help and had the ability to understand all of this stuff and put it all together, mix that in with the nerd brain. And that's kind of what we were doing. When I met Tim Sharp, actually during that process at Institute for Human Kinetics, I needed somebody that could handle the athlete's overall general health as well as the nutrition. I was adequate with nutrition and biochemistry, but wanted to take that burden off my shoulders. Came across Tim Sharp in the research community Him and I typically were advocating for similar things, which usually meant going against the grain of the general consensus, because when you look at literature, that tends to happen. And so we formed that relationship professionally where I could kind of lean on him to help me get these athletes ready in various different ways. He had biomedical background as well as being in academia as graduate and postgraduate professor. And so that's kind of where and what we were doing when I came across Lactigo. I put it to the test similarly to how Kevin did. Being a former, three sport athlete, I definitely could go out there and put it to what the test needed to be in order to be scrutinized for the athletes we had. Had a similar experience to Kevin. Thought there's no way this has to have illegal drugs in it. Contacted him, hence the discussion we had post finding out about the gel and receiving it. Then we had another discussion about this definitely is illegal. I demanded the ingredients list, got it from him, saw that it was cosmetic, as he mentioned, and inquired about the science. There was some work done on an initial patent. There was some data collected with athletes, but none of it had been compiled. And the patent left a lot of room for the things that we needed to do with the gel. So then I contacted him and said, "Hey, look, let me come on board. I know how to do all of this stuff in terms of science and the patent and working with the athletes. I have access to the population where we can kind of test this stuff the appropriate way." They agreed, and we were off and running. The first year of that, I kind of went solo about that mission to some extent. Then I had to bring in Dr. Tim Sharp as I got into writing the patent and we got into the actual work with the athletes. There was way too much going on to tackle it by myself. Once he became on board, then it was on and cracking at that point because then we were really able to do the work of about 15 people because I'm doing the work of about 8. So is he. So we were really pushing through all the red tape that's in science. We were eliminating all the time sinks that happen when you're passing it through 50 people's hands. So we were handling everything from the IRB applications all the way down to the recruitment of the athletes, design of the study, methodology, the whole 9 yards. During that process, we produced a second patent. So now we have both a medical as well as a human performance patent. It's a pretty robust in terms of we knew there was a delivery system in place in order to take this topical transdermal product to and through the skin to do the things it was doing. We added to what we thought we could potentially deliver down the road in the patent, which all made it through. So it's extremely robust in that regard. Things like insulin and testosterone, CoQ10, all the things that in science and medicine we would have an interest to less evasively and more safely be able to potentially deliver. And so we started off with, okay, we need to create a chain of evidence with science. There's a few ways that you can establish that with the topical. We set out to do that. First, we did transepidermal 3D skin study showing exactly how much carnosine magnesium we could put through the dermal layers in comparison to a placebo, and then also a vehicle with none of the proprietaries that are in our patent. We saw a 300% increase in the amount of carnosine delivered into and through the dermis comparison to the other two groups. And so that was the first proof of concept, all we needed to see. From there, we wanted to establish where could be primary endpoints for this carnosine. As you guys have kind of caught wind of, this is a great human performance tool. So we wanted to study where it would land within the muscle, did muscle biopsies. We did foresee this being a product that could be used in multiple different ways. So we also formulated a product as well as for the equine space for thoroughbred racehorses. We did biopsy studies both in thoroughbred racehorses and in an idea of what was happening in both those places where we had products that were seeing similar results in the thoroughbred racehorses. We were seeing the same things that we were seeing in our athletes. So we collected that data. What we found in the muscle biopsies, and for those of you that are unfamiliar, we're going in, we're taking a sample of the muscle before and after application of one time of Lactigo. So there was no prior use history. They hadn't been using it for a couple of weeks. And so that was one application. We measured before and after. We saw between a 50 and 100% increase after one application from baseline, both in humans and in thoroughbred racehorses. From there, we also wanted to collect performance data, what we call outcome-based data. So we could say, okay, Now we know where it goes. It can make it in and through the skin, do things both in and on the skin and through it, also into the muscle, which could affect human performance. We then went to some of the world's best athletes at AC Milan, their Serie A League soccer team, which at the time was number one in the world. We did a study with 15 of their athletes. Tim Sharp and I commissioned that. And what we did was an aerobic and an anaerobic arm. For those of you unfamiliar, that means sprinting with an all-out effort versus working really hard just underneath what would be considered a sprint. So still very difficult. We put the athletes through both of those tests, found statistical significance in those results with small but mostly medium effect size, especially in the anaerobic arm, which is very good in science. It tells us that the signal we saw is strong, and especially in a group of only 15 athletes, traditionally you would need a much larger population to see an effect, meaning that it was very strong. So we saw up to a 15% improvement in those elite athletes. From there, we also decided we wanted to study some of the other things that carnosine and magnesium were known for in athletic performance, which would be potentially a reduction in cramping. We used the same population. We used elite professional athletes, soccer players from the same system and team, and we saw a 60% reduction in cramping at the beginning of training camp when it's the highest, 60% day by day in the Lactigo group in comparison to a placebo. We also saw a good effect size and a great odds ratio. For those of you that are familiar, it was almost 2.5 times. So you were going to have almost a 2.5 time more probability of cramping if you did not use the gel, which in an athlete is extremely significant. A cramping could mean a shutdown for the day, the week, or even the year. So that was kind of how we established our kind of chain of command in terms of the evidence that we created. During that process, you guys, I'll give a kind of a brief pivot before I bring in Dr. Tim Sharp. So during that time, Tim and I would get lots of feedback from Usain Bolt, from Brittany Reese, from all these, the world's greatest athletes. And the number one positive feedback we got from them was about how they felt better in training after the weight room, after competition, and after practice. They weren't as sore. They were able to train and practice at a higher level, which then led to better performances. And why, you guys, I will mention at the time that Lactigo was introduced to our track and field athletes, the ones I mentioned, Brittany Reese, Dalia Muhammad, Usain Bolt, and Asafa Powell, Carlin Isles, and Marquise Goodwin. At the time it was introduced, there was still quite a few world records that had not been broken. All of those world records from the drug era were broken after we introduced Lactigo. And this is after having all of those athletes for 12 plus years in our system that Tim and I developed. So there was only one additional change in that entire 20-year span after those first 3 Olympic Games, and it was the addition of Lactigo. Usain Bolt broke the record. Brittany Reese broke the Olympic trials record. Carlin Isles scored the most tries in rugby at the Olympics. And Dalia Muhammad broke the record. And Marquise Goodwin had only the second ever non-drug tainted 100-meter time sub 10 seconds. The only two that have ever not tested dirty for performance-enhancing drug in the top 10 100-meter times are Usain Bolt and Marquise Goodwin, and both of them are Lactigo athletes. So they were doing some amazing things, you guys, when they had the addition of this gel. It wasn't just, hey, they go out and perform better. They shattered world records, Olympic records. And so during that time, these athletes, while they were performing well, that's not what they were talking about to Tim and I. They were saying, I feel great. I'm not sore. I can get out of bed. My injuries are better. My pain's gone. I got range of motion in my shoulder, etc., etc., etc. So that really piqued our interest. We wanted to study delayed onset muscle soreness. All of you guys have gone and hit legs after a long time, and you can't even sit down and go to the bathroom 2 days later. We all know about delayed onset muscle soreness. We really wanted to study it for the average person too. And so during that process, we needed to understand what is delayed onset muscle soreness, what is happening in the muscle that's creating that pain and reduces our ability to produce strength. So when we looked at that, the thing that kind of had lights glowing around it was something called glutamate. So we were like, oh yeah, that's going to be it. Glutamate is going to be what's causing that pain sensation in those nerves in our muscles when we work out really hard and we haven't been doing much, sitting on the couch. So we were like, well, let's investigate what carnosine can do with glutamate. Well, they can't coexist in the same place. I could think of a few religious groups to mention that would be comparable, but I won't. But let's just say there was some fierce battles if these two were to see each other in a dark alley. So what that meant was that's great for us. That means that we're going to be able to potentially mitigate the things that are creating this pain. If we get rid of the pain, we're going to have better strength. That's just how it works. So that's what kind of piqued our interest in terms of our next research product. So we started designing the research study. When that happened within the first week, the kind of lights clicked in my head because I said, you know what? Delayed onset muscle soreness, the more I learn about it, sounds an awful lot like fibromyalgia. And that's really where all this kind of started to matter. You know, improving performance in athletes is great. And there's only basically illegal drugs, protein and creatine that actually have evidence. There's not much out there, and that is fantastic. But this was something different because now we're talking about health. Now we're talking about general wellness, and we're talking about something that doesn't have an actual treatment for it to date, fibromyalgia. And so that was really where we realized, hey, this is not just a human performance improvement gel that can be used by athletes. And that's really where we kind of had to slow down and look at what we were doing, get ourselves right with the FDA and Health Canada. And that is exactly what we did, you guys. So this product is fully regulated by both the FDA in our menthol version, and the non-menthol version is fully regulated by Health Canada, which is the same regulatory body as the FDA there. So once we had all those things in place, we started to kind of look at all this stuff that was going on in the human body. And I'm going to bring in Dr. Tim Sharp and let him kind of speak a little bit more about the biomedical side of what we're investigating now and what the research has already shown us a path about what carnosine can and would do if people were able to get it through oral delivery, which they can't. And so I will only mention this, you guys. As I kind of looked at fibromyalgia, and we found this foe that was potentially causing these problems in interstitial glutamate. The more that we started to understand that, carnosine can do really unique things for the nervous system as well as all these other systems in the body. But it is very good at creating homeostasis for the nervous system and calming down hyperexcitability and excitotoxicity and all these things. And when we really started to look at all these different conditions like cystic fibrosis, like fibromyalgia, like Parkinson's disease, like Alzheimer's, like ADHD, like autism, one of the things that's a common thread for all of those is glutamate. Hands down, is the number one neurotransmitter for memory. It is extremely important for our bodies. However, when it is found in excess, which you see in all of those conditions, it wreaks havoc. Carnosine and glutamate cannot coexist, like I mentioned. That's an extremely powerful statement when you realize how many different places it's causing a problem and one of the main culprits for those diseases I mentioned. So, with that being said, I want to introduce my partner in crime, also my best friend in real life as well, Dr. Tim Sharp. As I mentioned, we've had a professional relationship now for well over a decade. We've always advocated for truth and fact in the research community, specifically in brain cancer, which both of us studied in clinical trials that we designed together. And so he is a post-grad professor, the director of our department for functional biochemistry and nutrition in a human performance and functional medicine program at University of Western States, where I have the pleasure of teaching underneath him. We use that in our academic foothold to help us kind of make our way through our science. That is one of the ways that we kind of maintain relevancy in that world. And he is in charge of that program, on top of being in charge of all of the nutrition and well-being for our athletes, where he spent many years advocating with the UFC, trying to regulate so many different things. We don't have enough time to cover on this call, on top of all the things that he's done in his private practice, in using acupuncture, Chinese medicine, and all these other fantastic things that he has experience in. He's traveled all over the world, one of the most unique people that you will ever talk to. His disciplines span and cross over into human performance and disease, which is where him and I have both spent the last 25 years. So he has multiple degrees that are of area and interest in biomedical research. And he is a fantastic person to understand how all of this interacts in that space. So, with that being said, I'd like to have Dr. Tim Sharp come on and he can kind of discuss a little bit more about not just what carnosine can do with glutamate, but it is also really good as an anti-inflammatory, an anti-glycation end product. It does so many different things as an immunomodulator, as a neuromodulator slash transmitter, and all this other fantastic stuff. So, Dr. Tim Sharp, are you available to come on?
All right. So, continuing, I am the head of nutrition for the Institute for Human Kinetics, as Chad mentioned. As instructor at the University of Western States, I either currently or have previously taught their capstone course, which is the course that is the final course for all students. So I was the one that advised them all on their capstone projects, so the research papers. So I helped them choose their topic. I helped guide them through that whole process. That includes everything from actual conducting research to things more like a narrative review or just like a review of the literature. But I basically every student that went through the university had to go through me in terms of like closing up everything that they had, like their final graduation process. I helped with the gastroenterological imbalances, their environmental medicine. Currently, I focus on their sports nutrition and exercise metabolism for the university. With Etherderm and Lactigo, I'm director of research and development. I'm co-author of the patent along with Chad. I was the lead author on the first paper that we wrote that he discussed in detail, and have been a part of pretty much every paper that we've published since that point. I think that covers biographically, that covers my experience. I did want to touch on a lot of the disease potential for carnosine and Lactigo. We talked a lot about performance. Chad touched on different areas. I feel like he was looking for opportunities to steal thunder by bringing up a lot of the awesome stuff that happens with when you have access to something as powerful as what Lactigo is. But I'm going to go in and see if I can do a little bit, go a little deeper on a few of the things. The first thing we have to talk about is exercise performance. I mean, that is what brought us all together. That is originally what people thought of Lactigo as doing, which is enhancing exercise performance. So one of the biggest things that it does is it acts as a buffer. So it helps prevent the cells from becoming too acidic. And when muscle cells become too acidic, they have trouble contracting, right? That's how our muscles work, through contracting. And when they become more acid, their ability to contract is diminished. And carnosine is really probably one of the most effective molecules, probably the most effective molecule for preventing that from happening. So the fact that we were the first and only company to develop a product that you could apply directly and would immediately reduce that process, like minimize the amount, like slow down how quickly muscles acidify and reduce the total amount that happens through buffering. That's the one of the many aspects of the sports side of Lactigo. And we found that since then that it helps not only with that, it helps with your high intensity work. So if you get on and you do your high intensity interval training, you get on and say you're doing an hour on the bike, or you're sprinting, it helps with that. It helps with hockey, which a lot of the guys that are on the Lactigo team are hockey players. It helps great with that. But we're finding that it also helps with endurance exercise. And that's not something that people typically thought of muscle pH buffers as doing. So that's been fantastic. But that's really just the tip of the iceberg because carnosine, it does so much more than just the sports side. One of the biggest things that is a characteristic of carnosine is it is an antioxidant. So that's a term I'm sure that's familiar with all of you. It basically neutralizes oxidation that can damage cells. And one of the amazing things about something being a potent antioxidant is oxidation is something that affects cells in almost every disease process. So if you have something that can easily enter cells and can prevent or delay that oxidation, the potential upside for that being a therapeutic intervention, it's unlimited. Like the number of different ways that could potentially benefit different disease states, it's kind of mind blowing. So I'm gonna talk about some of that. I'm gonna talk about a few different disease states, and a lot of them, this antioxidant like process is going to be one of the ways that it works. Um, One of the other things that's related to the antioxidant protection is it binds to metals like copper and zinc. And the reason why that is related is when you have these metals, they actually contribute to oxidation. So serving as an antioxidant and also binding to metals that cause oxidation, it's kind of a 1-2 punch, which is really effective. And you'll find later on some of the other stuff that I'm gonna talk about. Lactigo is kind of unique in its ability to have those types of 1-2 punches where it will treat the root of whatever the problem is, but then it also treats the downstream effects. And I can't think of anything else that actually does that at all, much less as effectively as what Lactigo does. So related to antioxidant is anti-inflammatory. Carnosine is a very powerful anti-inflammatory molecule. And this is one of those things where I was talking about the 1-2 punch, because when we're talking about inflammation, there are a few different things that we're talking about. One is there are pathways that we call them like signaling pathways. An example would be a fancy molecule called nuclear factor kappa beta. And all that is it is a pathway that turns genes on that are inflammatory. So if you can prevent that from happening, if you can prevent those genes from flipping on so that they become inflammatory, so you prevent them from becoming inflammatory, then you're kind of stopping it at the root, right? You're preventing inflammation before it even happens. And that's something that carnosine has the ability to do. But at some point, there are things that we do, including exercise, but also disease states, where you can't stop the inflammation from happening. There's a point at which you are actually going to trigger inflammation, and that's okay. The body is designed to become inflamed. That is a natural process, but you don't want to get that you don't want that to go out of control. And another thing that carnosine can do is it can inhibit what we call pro-inflammatory cytokines. So basically the downstream or the after effect of the inflammation. Once we get inflammation, we get these molecules like they all have fancy names like interleukin 6 or IL-6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNFA is another one that you see a lot. And carnosine can actually blunt those so that it makes it so that they're no longer causing an inflammatory effect on the body. So it happens at the top, at the root of the stream. So it stops the stream of inflammation from branching out. And then once that actually happens, it eliminates the downstream products of that actual flood of inflammation. So that's another example of that kind of 1-2 punch that I was talking about. I also wanted to talk about cardiovascular and metabolic health. So something else that carnosine does is it it improves glucose metabolism. And the main ways that it does that is through improving insulin sensitivity. So how much have you guys heard about insulin and insulin sensitivity as being something that everyone across the world is concerned about right now, right? It's a huge thing. Diabetes, metabolic syndrome, um, these things are rampant. And carnosine can really help with that, partially through its antioxidant capacity, like I was talking about before. It also does something which we call anti-glycation. Um, it prevents, again, anti-glycation. It prevents anti-glycation end products. So when you have this process called glycation, which simply put is just when a sugar attaches to protein and fat and then can start to accumulate. You'll know it if you've ever grilled. If you look at what happens to meat or vegetables when you grill them, how it browns and gets tough and hard, that is glycation. We don't want a lot of that in our body. And carnosine has a great ability to protect tissues from that glycation. And it prevents those, what we call anti-glycation end products, or you'll see it written as AGES, AGES. One of the great benefits of that is improved blood flow, because when you start having these accumulations of those end products, you start to inhibit your blood flow, which of course becomes a problem. So that's a huge benefit. Let's see. What are some other things? Chad talked about neurology. He talked about excitability. So if we tie the neurology part into diabetes, which we were just talking about, those anti-glycation end products, they actually can cause nerve damage, which is what we see in neuropathy with patients that have diabetes. So if there was an effective treatment, like an effective way to deliver carnosine, then the potential to alleviate that is fantastic. I mean, this goes on, and I'm going to continue going on and on for for a little bit so everybody gets bored. But great potential in diabetic neuropathy through that mechanism that we talked about. It also limits oxidative stress in just peripheral nerve tissues. So that just means nerve tissues like at the end. So fingers, feet, hands, which are all the classic areas where people that are diabetic end up having problems. Chad talked about glutamate, and carnosine is great for neurological health and neuroprotection. One of the things that happens, he talked about excitability. So when you have an overactivity in nerve cells, in any nerve cell, but definitely specifically in the brain, that overactivity can actually damage those cells. So like a hyperexcitability that you can get from glutamate or whatever the mechanism is, you can actually kill brain cells and kill nerve cells. So you really want to be able to regulate that hyperexcitability. And that regulation is something that carnosine excels at. Chad talked about glutamate. Carnosine modulates glutamate. It also helps. I don't know if you have heard of the term GABA, GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. I was just doing that to make sure that I could do it. I wasn't expecting everybody to catch that. I'm proud I was able to spit that out. Carnosine is fantastic at helping with GABA neurotransmission. So the ability for your brain and your nerve cells to be able to utilize GABA, which also helps with that hyperexcitability. And what we don't want is we don't want nerve cells to die, right? Neuronal cell death, big problem. I mean, just saying it out loud, it's obvious that it's a problem. But now that we know that there's something that we can do that can help prevent that, which is the effective use of carnosine, that's fantastic. That's an opportunity that a lot of people didn't know was available to them. Just a couple of the things that I want to mention, because I feel like I'm getting long-winded here. There's In terms of longevity, there's cellular longevity, so the how long our cells live. That's going to be affected by all of these processes that I talked about, right? If you have oxidation, that's going to impact your cellular longevity. If you have those ages, those glycation end products, that's going to affect your cellular longevity. But carnosine goes even beyond that. There's a thing known as telomeres, which is a marker for basically it's a longevity marker, and what they look as you age, you want the longest possible telomeres that you can have, and carnosine has the ability to prevent the shortening of telomeres, and it does that through, you can probably guess, the things that we talked about, the antioxidant activity and the anti-inflammatory activity. They help reduce the shortening of telomeres, which has tremendous potential for anti-aging. That oxidative stress that we talked about, it also affects DNA. So we protect from DNA damage through the antioxidant capacity of carnosine. And then the last thing that I want to cover from like a disease perspective is just general cognitive function and dementia protection, whether it's Alzheimer's, or there are a lot of different. Alzheimer's is the type of dementia that most people are aware of, but there are many different categories of dementia. If you can limit the amount of oxidative damage that is linked to that cognitive decline, the neuronal death, then your odds of being able to impact dementia and cognitive function are a lot greater. So just the basic properties of carnosine are perfect for nerve cells and cognitive function and dementia prevention. It also enhances cellular mitochondria, or the cellular energy system metabolism, through its ability to enhance mitochondrial function. And the brain is the organ that we have that demands the most mitochondria, right? The most mitochondrial activity happens in the brain. So if you can enhance that, your ability to help with cognitive function, dementia protection, preserve the health and integrity of neuronal cells, neurons, is just a lot greater. So the sky's the limit in terms of the number of different ways that carnosine can be beneficial. And the fact that we have a product that we know from lab testing, we know from biopsy testing in both humans and horses, we know from 3D skin test, we know from outcome studies, both independently done and also in-house studies, and then other studies that we have that are just in the working stage. We have so much evidence about the ability to deliver carnosine and for it to be delivered in a quantity that actually makes a difference, that once you understand a lot of these other aspects, these physiological aspects of the molecule of carnosine, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but it really excites me, and that gets me ready to go to work every day.
Just real quick, I do want to say, guys, Lactigo is not intended to treat or diagnose disease. However, with that being said, every single thing that I talked about, Dr. Tim Sharp talked about, has already been studied by other researchers. You can find any of the things that we talked about through a simple Google search and find the research studies they've published, look at any review paper on carnosine. All of the things that we talked about are not our claims. This is what's already been established by the medical community and other researchers to date. They, just like everybody else in the world, just don't have a product that can actually deliver carnosine. And if every time you read these research papers, they've done it with a subpar, suboptimal delivery method. So with that being said, everything that we talked about has already been established through the scientific literature, through clinical trials, with dozens and dozens of different research groups around the world. So all those things are things that you can follow up on and get more information about, or follow up with us if you're curious. We've got a whole cache of studies for everything that we were talking about, guys.
Thank you, Chad, and thank you for sharing so much insight and giving us so much information. PubMed.gov, great resource. National Institute of Health. You can type in magnesium, carnosine, see the value of research that's going on there. I think the key to this, if I don't speak out of turn on this, is that when we talk about a proprietary delivery system of utilizing this gel, we're moving carnosine deep into the tissues right where it counts. So as Dr. Sharp is talking about these key things, we're able to deliver carnosine in a measured and a level that's never been seen before. Is that a fair statement, Chad?
It's not that it's just never been seen before. It's never happened. It's the first time this has ever been done.